Hi, I'm back. The dog's behind me now. Okay, let's pick up where we left off. So on page 67, we only got to one key concept in the last video. I promise I will talk less. Okay, key concept 6.1, technological advances, large-scale production methods, and the opening of new markets, everything we talked about. Encourage the rise of industrial capitalism in the United States. Roman numeral 2, a variety of perspectives on the economy and labor developed during a time of financial panics and downturns. I didn't really read over this. I just want to mention, in case it's not mentioned earlier, time of financial panics and downturns, right? This is like the long depression. You have the panic in 1873, and then you have another panic in 1893. Even after 1893, the economy isn't great. The Klondike Gold Rush in the late 1890s does help the economy, but then there's another panic, which we read about this summer in Money Men in 1907. There's a brief one right before World War I that only getting involved in World War I, or starting Europe getting involved in World War I, selling things to them got us out. There's another one in early 1920s, and then of course the great stock market crash. So all of this Gilded Age leads to that financial instability, these boom and bust cycles, right? We've talked about growth, contraction, which is the business cycle, but it's especially bad in the Gilded Age. Okay, so let's get started. A. Some argue that laissez-faire policies and competition promoted economic growth in the long run, and they opposed government intervention during economic downturns. I don't think we read anything necessarily specifically just about this concept, but this would be, what a lot of your robber barons would subscribe to. It's the justification of we read things like Wealth by Carnegie. That's a justification for this, saying that business people get more because they work harder. But just like with the economic aspect, I guess, that's what you read about, like Rockefeller this summer in your summer reading books, or you were supposed to. That's like the, I'm sorry, not Rockefeller, JP Morgan. This would be like the Morgan argument. Oh yeah, back up on the previous concept where it said redesign financial and management structures. Remember we talked about Morganization? That would be a good one to throw in there to organize business more efficiently. So there's your robber barons would subscribe to A. But then of course you have to question, is this really laissez-faire if the government's giving government subsidies? Okay. I said my piece. B. The industrial workforce expanded and became more diverse through international and internal migration. We talked about both of those in the previous video. Internal migration, pizza bagels, Chinese, and then the Japanese. And then it says child labor also increased. Remember, this is a time well before any kind of child labor laws. See, I told you it'd be quick. We're on to C. Labor and management battled over wages and working conditions, with workers organizing local and national unions and or directly confronting business leaders. We didn't spend as much time on it as I would have liked, but you do have an era of strikes. In fact, this period from like 1877 until around 1900 is called the era of strikes. Some of the big ones are the Great Railroad Uprising, railroad worker strike, and then there's sympathy strikes. It shuts down a lot of rail traffic east of the Mississippi. There's the Haymarket strike that ends the Knights of Labor, one of these labor unions that's mentioned. The Knights of Labor wanting kind of utopian unionism and working for an 8-hour workday, 8 hours for sleep, and then 8 hours for rest. Knights of Labor was both skilled, semi-skilled, men, women, and I believe allowed in African Americans. Haymarket Square, we just said. There's the big Homestead steel strike at Carnegie's Homestead plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania. People actually died in that one. They call them the Pinkertons because they call in scabs, and they call in Pinkertons as strike breakers. Is there something else I want to say with that? No. And then there's the big Pullman strike, where Eugene V. Debs kind of gets his start. He's the head organizer of the American Railroad Union. It shuts down traffic all over the country because Pullman is on the south side of Chicago, and that's the major hub of the railroads. Pullman is Debs is arrested and put in jail, and then we have that In re Debs decision where the courts say that Cleveland's use of a federal injunction because the strike interfered with mail service was justified. So all of those are examples. And remember, at the beginning of the year, we read Gomper's piece. Samuel Gompers created not created, but he was the head of the American that's my dog shaking. Head of the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, from its near its beginning in the 1880s all the way until his death in the 1920s. So that becomes really the biggest national union, but there's tons of smaller unions. There's Molly Maguire's, there's steel workers, there's coal miners, all different kinds of often industry specific garment workers, female garment workers, just cloak makers in like New York City and Philadelphia. And then there's tons of really smaller strikes. We just cover some of the major national ones with national impact. Okay, and then D. Despite the industrialization of some segments of the Southern economy, a change promoted by Southern leaders who called for a new South, agriculture based on sharecropping and tenant farming continued to be the primary economic activity in the South. Hold on. Okay. My dog was just whining. Okay, so the New South is a failure. It's an attempt after the Civil War to industrialize the South, and it just doesn't work. Southerners don't want to, like the people with money in the South own plantations, and they don't want to sell their plantations and invest in kind of risky building of industry. And so the New South kind of fails. What ends up happening is just the factories that are built in the South are built by Northerners who use their capital to build it down in the South, and it almost becomes like, sometimes it's called like an internal colony. There we go. So the New South is a failure, and yes, you have sharecropping and tenant farming in the South. We talked about that in class a lot. I talked about it on the 5.2 or 5.3 video. And remember, African Americans are certainly sharecroppers, but there's also white sharecroppers and tenant farmers in the South. The poor whites are employed in that business as well. It's just they don't have the restrictions on their contracts, and they can have a little more, well, they have a lot more legal flexibility than do African American sharecroppers. Okay, so South continues to be dominated by cotton, the lower South tobacco, and the upper South. Yay, we're moving on to another one. Okay, Roman numeral 3. New systems of production and transportation enabled consolidation within agriculture, which, along with periods of instability, spurred a variety of responses from farmers. Oh, maybe do get into populist movement in this one. I forget. Yeah, I think populists now are in period 6. And progressives are in period 7. Not that it really matters. As long as you know the information, you don't have to really worry about the time periods. Okay, so A. Improvements in mechanization helped agricultural production increase substantially and contributed to a decline in food prices. I think we looked at a couple graphs of that from the beginning of the year. So first of all, in the West, you have a lot more land acreage that comes under cultivation as we move into the West. But then also it says improvements in mechanization. Right, so we talked about before the Civil War in period 4, you have like the mechanical reaper and the steel plow. Now you have things like the combine harvester. It combines a reaper and a thresher, so it reaps the wheat but also like bales it. All of this means that a single farmer can produce more on the same size of land, but then you also have more and more land coming under cultivation, so farmers' production is drastically increasing, and then because of supply and demand, the more supply you have, the lower the price becomes. Volumes of scale, that's a phrase I was trying to think of in the previous video and just completely blanked. Volume of scale. Okay, when you produce more of something in higher volume, you get discounts. Okay. It just popped into my head. Okay, B. Many farmers responded to the increased consolidation in agricultural markets and their dependence on the evolving railroad system by creating local and regional cooperative organizations. So C gets into the populace, but remember, before you had the populace, you had first you had, who was first? The Grangers. The Grangers were almost more like a social organization, and then you had the farmers' alliances, and then you have the populace. You have like the Granger laws that tried to especially control the railroads. I think we read something where they called them like the thieves in the night. And then I remember we looked at I think a political cartoon in class where it had the Western slaves, which were farmers, and their Eastern masters, which were railroad companies, bankers. I feel like there's a third one on that cartoon. But this is the farmers do try and respond to it, first through kind of social organizations and helping each other out, then through farmers alliances. Some of the farmers alliances tried to pool resources, share grain silos, grain storage, share some of the very expensive machinery that farmers, like harvesters or combine harvesters, that farmers were having to purchase, have to, but for increased production. And so that would be the local. Local would be Grangers, regional would be the farmers alliances, because you have like a Southern Farmers Alliance, Colored Farmers Alliance, cooperative organizations. Yeah, I think that's all you need to know. One thing we did talk about, like the Granger laws, they try and pass restrictive laws over especially railroad companies, and that the Granger laws result in first Munn v. Illinois, which is then overturned by the Wabash case, which creates the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. Well, first the Interstate Commerce Act that creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, but just say ICC, which is the federal government involved in interstate transportation. That may be covered in a later one. Okay, let's hit this last one, and then we'll be done with this video, at least. Okay, so C, economic instability inspired agrarian activists to create the Populist or the People's Party, which called for a stronger government role in regulating the American economic system. Right, so the Populist Party platform, also known as the Omaha platform, is often a primary source on the test. In the time period, often used on like DBQs, and then you can often see it in multiple choice sections as one of the document prompts. So, I mean, the populists really kind of come in. I mean, they start in the late 1880s, kind of picking up from the National Farmers Alliances, and then certainly in the 1890s, especially with the onset of the Panic of 1893, then pushes them to a national election in 1896, when McKinley runs against William Jennings Bryan. He gives his big Cross of Gold speech, which we looked at earlier in the year, and calls for a stronger governmental role in regulating the American economic system. They want the government to control railroads, almost like a socialist idea platform, because they're of national importance. They want the government to create savings and loans through post offices, which Historical Synthesis, Elizabeth Warren, apparently, I didn't really read the full article the other day, but apparently Elizabeth Warren has suggested something like that the local post office would be responsible for keeping almost like a savings account, or could be responsible for keeping savings accounts for people who wanted to open it, and not with one of the big banks. So that's kind of interesting, populist idea back. But also all different kind of government control, like the whole silver and gold standard, and the government controlling the economy and creating like a silver standard that would help farmers get money in lower denominations, because it's hard for them to get gold, which is so valuable. And so you see that echoed in the Populist Party platform. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I'll pick up with, oh good, we finished 6.1. I'll pick up with 6.2 in the next video.